A warm welcome, everybody, to the Kiel Imaging Seminar. It is KIS Monday again, and we are grateful to have you all here with us tonight. We have a fantastic speaker. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Daniel Christopher Hoinkiss. Dr. Daniel Hoinkiss is a principal scientist at Fraunhofer Institute for Digital Medicine MEVIS in Bremen. His PhD focused on developing motion correction techniques to improve image quality in MRI. Daniel is now leading a team of researchers at MEVIS dedicated to advancing vendor-agnostic MR sequence development. His research on real-time adaptation of MRI sequences includes the real-time interface for gammaSTAR framework and the vendor-independent MRI platform. gammaSTAR not only reduces variability across different MR systems, but also makes MRI sequence development more accessible, facilitating the easier transfer of research findings. So before we start, to the audience, please wait with your questions till the discussion period. With that being said, Daniel, the stage is all yours.
Okay, thanks a lot, Maya. So also thank you for inviting me. So for the next maybe 40 minutes, I will give you an overview about the gammaSTAR framework. So the title is actually Hardware-Agnostic MR Sequence Development, and I will give an overview of this framework that we've been developing for the last years. My name is Daniel Hoinkiss. I'm based at the Fraunhofer MEVIS in Bremen. So this research institute for digital medicine was founded in 1995, and 2009 became part of the Fraunhofer Gesellschaft. We are mainly based in Bremen with our new beautiful building here, and also have two major sites in Lübeck and Berlin. MEVIS houses around 140 scientists, from computer scientists, mathematicians, physicists, to also physicians. I'm part of the imaging physics group, mainly focusing on MR imaging and ultrasound imaging. So today I was asked to give a presentation about the gammaSTAR framework, with which we aim to develop hardware-agnostic MR file sequences, and as Maya already said, we try to make this topic of sequence development for magnetic resonance imaging also more accessible to both experts but also non-experts to the field. So what is it all about hardware-agnostic MR file sequences? Typically, we have the current scenario where we have MR systems from different vendors or different equipped with software of different version or different models of MR systems, all requiring compiling a dedicated sequence to run at the MR system. So we try to unify that by having a generalized image MR sequence format. We equip the MR systems with a dedicated gammaSTAR driver that will then translate this generalized MR sequence format to the vendor-specific language, and then in the end, producing harmonized and standardized images, because the underlying MR sequence is always exactly the same. So this also makes sharing of MR sequences, reconstruction, and data a lot easier, because you do not have to take into account the vendor's proprietary sequence development with which the sequence was developed. So I want to give you a perspective a bit from the project side. So we started, or actually colleagues of me started back in 2015. So that's also when I started writing my PhD thesis in the field of prospective motion correction. It began with the idea to have a general MR framework for research and industry. It was a Fraunhofer internally funded project. So I joined the team around here, 2022, and started developing a real-time interface for gammaSTAR, so that it would be able to also facilitate topics like prospective motion correction, as I worked on these topics a lot during my PhD thesis. We got some smaller funding from the Fraunhofer side, but then 2022, we were awarded a research funding from the Federal Ministry of Education and Research, and that's how this project is currently funded. And the goal of that is a validation of the framework together with a redesign of the whole user experience and the whole code base of gammaSTAR. So let's give it a view in terms of milestones. So I will go through some of the milestones we achieved with this framework, and based on these milestones, I give you a bit more details about how this actually works and what the different components of gammaSTAR are. So right in the first project where this prototype of the framework was developed, we started developing a driver software for Siemens MR systems, because we own a Siemens 3 Tesla system, so it was the easiest to start with that. So when looking at the installation at the scanner, we have this driver concept. So if we have the host console here and the MR system here, we add like two components. First, our interpreter, which is installed on the host computer, and a driver interface. So this interpreter makes it possible to communicate with gammaSTAR. You will see it in a second, and to also do like protocol changes, select sequences, and do all the user interaction right at the MR system. So if we have a look at this video, we can see that this is the usual MR environment of Siemens engineers. So we already queued our gammaSTAR driver, and it will now execute a first default scan. So the default configuration is we just acquire a simple 2D flash sequence. We can also directly get the reconstruction from the vendor reconstruction system, or if we want from other reconstructions, like reconstruction frameworks like Gadget, for example. We also, as you've seen, we also use the same user interaction as event sequences, so we can drag and rotate the slices directly in the vendor's interface. And as you can see, we just selected another slice. So if we want to change the sequence or adapt any of the gammaSTAR sequence parameters, we can simply open this little UI here, change all the parameters, and that's something that's quite special about gammaSTAR. So every sequence that you, that you execute is still configurable at the scanner. So we just change the number of slices to 3. We can now scroll through the different slices, and can also see when we go back that we also get the visual feedback that's users are used to with the different slices in the visual UI. We have access to all our gammaSTAR sequences, so we just saw this drop-down menu changing the sequences. Now we selected an arterial spin labeling sequence, a depth sum parameter. Select the sequence. Also get a feedback on the acquisition time here, which would be 24 seconds now. And this is a 3D sequence, so this 3D grace readout. We see the slab and the volume which we read out right of this view. and can also be the ASL sequence one. So maybe some example acquisitions of our software driver from at the Siemens systems. We are basically supporting all the different software versions, different system MR systems. We did a lot of testing for 3 Tesla and 1.5 Tesla for 3D sequences, 2D sequences. So we have typical BSSFP, Flash, MPH MR sequences, but also segmented WARE and flare sequences. We also did some comparison for MR spectroscopy, and for dynamic imaging we have validated diffusion weighted imaging, and also like as we are a research site that's historically doing a lot of arterial spin labeling, we also have different MR sequences for arterial spin labeling, where you can see the inflow of the blood, the perfusion over the different inflow times here, and then the calculated parameter maps. Also, some different non-Cartesian MR sequences. This is an example of a radial sequence, but we also implemented spiral trajectories, for example. So just as an overview of the current image quality and performance of the gammaSTAR sequences against the vendor sequences. So then we had a very early prototype of the sequence development environment online as a read-only version, just to look at the different MR sequences and play around with them a bit. And as I said, then I started to implement the real-time interface, which would make it possible to also to also allow applications like prospective motion correction, so dynamic changes during the execution of the sequence. What we do there is that we add a little component to this overview. So we add a WebSocket server that's constantly running and updating the sequence with current feedback values. And as soon as we, from any feedback source, get updates to this sequence server, feedback server, it would then synchronize with our gammaSTAR backend installed at the MR system and change the sequence accordingly. So for example, it could change the positioning and the orientation of the scan in terms of prospective motion correction, or if there are any dynamic timing changes, like for example in dynamic Hadamard arterial spin labeling sequences, it would adapt the sequence timing during runtime also. And this is mainly possible because here on the left, what we bring to the sequence is not a fixed order of hardware events that we execute, but it's still the whole sequence logic. So the sequence is implemented in a scripting language, which is based on C. And since the driver software that we implemented here for Siemens, for example, is based on C or C++, it can interpret the sequence logic during runtime. So the actual hardware executions are calculated during runtime. So it would allow first configuring the sequence prior to the scan with protocol changes, but also things like prospective motion correction. We also have driver implementations in Python that will get interesting, for example, with tabletop systems or simulation environments. And there's also a way to execute Lua code with a library called Lupa. So we are in any driver implementation able to execute the sequence logic during runtime, and then calculate the hardware events going to the scanner on the fly. So this also allows to not pre-calculate the whole sequence before the scan. So if we do that, we would have no chance to change it during the scan. So what we do is, if we look at what gammaSTAR calculates and what's then executed at the scanner here in blue, we can see that we only pre-calculate a very small amount of events. For example, this could be 30 milliseconds or up to 100 milliseconds, depending on the real-time scenario that you want to achieve. And this pre-calculation of the first hardware events is then sent to the MR system to be executed, and during at the same time, the next hardware events will be calculated in the backend. So we go back and forth between hardware execution at the MR system and calculating the next hardware events in our gammaSTAR backend. So this gives us then here in red these logical entry points for feedback of the sequence, because in these at these points where we switch between sequence execution and the calculation of the next hardware events, we can recalculate different parameters of the sequence and then change what's being calculated for the next buffer time. So we did that for prospective motion correction. So a simple EPI scan, 6 minutes, where we saw without any head restraints that there was a slight shift of the subject of around 2 millimeters or up to, oh no, it's up to 2 degrees in one direction, and yeah, up to 2 millimeters. So we restricted that to a very limited amount of motion by applying prospective motion correction. So we also had a little project about interventional MR imaging. So the task was to enable real-time steering of interventional devices in a vendor-independent framework. So what we did is that we had a guide wire equipped with passive MR markers, so that they would insert like black holes into the images, so negative passive MR markers. And we would then send the image data in real time over network to our computing devices, calculate the position of the guide wire, and then reposition the imaging slice so that the guide wire would always be in this real-time in this position and orientation that we run our sequence with. So we built a 3D vessel phantom with acrylic glass and follow this guide wire throughout this glass. So we applied not only 2-dimensional but also 3-dimensional image transformations, changed the sequence to follow this guide wire throughout the vessel phantom. So then we got first proof of concept images on GE systems, but that's with a PulseSec export and using the TOPI driver. So we did some phantom scanning and also a MR acquisition of a sheep brain with the help of Jon Frederick Nielsen of the University of Michigan. And then we started a collaboration with the University of Leiden to develop a native driver for Philips MR systems. So there, the idea was that there were some different concepts between the vendors. So we started thinking about what needs to be changed from the current interpretation to make it possible to run on Philips systems. So it was basically identifying repeated sequence objects and then allow different startup times. So if we can see here what we execute on Siemens or in how we calculate the sequence in gammaSTAR, we have 3 different events within a single a readout module here, and we detect these ADC events where we do not have enough startup time, and then combine the modules into combined blocks so they would be able to be executed. So we have almost the same video for Philips, so can start that, I hope, and we can also see that the positioning is also done with the vendors interface. We now again start our little gammaSTAR protocol UI, can select the sequence, change different parameters. And would now just start the sequence.
The next scan will take less than half a minute.
And also here the images are already available in the host vendor software, because the vendor reconstruction pipeline can be used. So we did some traveling head study to compare the Siemens and the Philips implementation. So we did that with a 2D flash sequence and a 3D MEVIS sequence, and did the reconstruction directly on the scanner with the vendor image reconstruction pipeline. So for the MEVIS, we can see the images here. I think it's very comparable. So we see a pretty high image quality throughout both the vendor sequences and the gammaSTAR sequences, and the same goes for the flash sequence. But it's not always possible to use the vendor pipeline. So for example, we were not able to use the gammaSTAR EPI phase correction information or Guapa PuScan information. So we decided to also use the isomer M1 data format together with Gadgetron to have a dedicated reconstruction for the EPI-based sequences. So we did some comparison between MR sequences acquired with parallel imaging, for example, here with the Philips reconstruction using SENSE, and the Gadgetron reconstruction using the Guapa reference lines, which was not able to be executed by the vendor pipeline. So this is just an example of a WARE sequence with a Gadgetron pipeline, so a vendor-independent sequence together with a vendor-independent open source image reconstruction pipeline. And the same for a pseudo-continuous ASL sequence. Also both completely reconstructed, the right side reconstructed in Gadgetron, and as a comparison, the reconstruction in Philips, in the Philips reconstruction pipeline. So then we also did a 3-vendor comparison, again for GE with the PulseSec export and TOPI interpreter, and for the Philips and Siemens systems with native gammaSTAR driver software. So we implemented both a STEAM and a POS sequence, and have very similar looking spectra. Then we always try to increase the amount of sequences, modules that are available in the gammaSTAR sequence library. So I already talked about that. So we have 2D, 3D sequences, Cartesian, non-Cartesian, MR imaging, MR spectroscopy, and many corporation modules like fat or water suppression, Q2 tips, etc. And also many different acceleration techniques. And I also mentioned that we are currently completely redesigning the gammaSTAR software. So we really try to make it more accessible than the prototype back from 2020. So we both redesigned the whole backend and the whole front end user interface. But I will show that to you in a second. So talking about sequence design in gammaSTAR, so the concept behind it, we can actually look at a EPI readout. So what we see here is a typical EPI readout with phase encoding blips in green and the readout gradients in red and the ADC objects here in black. So we already see that it's some kind of repeating objects. So we define them within a single gammaSTAR module with different signs or polarity of the X gradients, but it's all defined in the same module, just with different parameterization. So basically, we are executing this module again and again and again, and change the sign in between. So we can also do it within a loop. So we have a loop module that loops over the single readout event and then changes the polarity of the gradient from plus to minus back and forth. And with each loop iteration, it would change the start time of these readouts, so that the first one would start at 0, the second one would start at 5 milliseconds, and so on. So this is all defined in a hierarchical way. So we have a hierarchy with the loop on top that will execute the module below and iterate over the different start times and parameterizations of this module. And this is then in a hierarchy defined by the different hardware executions below. So here it would be the readout gradient, the acquisition or the ADC event, and the little phase encoding blip here. And they are all defined by start times, the readout event starting at 0, the ADC event starting, let's say, at 0.5, and the blip starting here at the end. So we define such a or the most minimal description of hardware events, we define them as atomic events, because these are then also the events that will directly be translated to hardware events and then sent to the scanner. In the gammaSTAR front end, it would look like that. So we have a loop module in a hierarchy that would then execute iteratively the readout event, and then give us this readout train of positive and negative single readouts. We would combine that with a dephasing gradient and a rephasing gradient, both in the same hierarchy as the loop, so that they are executed once only. And all the gammaSTAR modules here would have information about start time, duration, and where they would be positioned in the timeline of the scan. And the modules are always ordered by the start time from lowest to highest, so that the dephaser will also happen or be executed first, then the whole line loop, and then the rephasing gradient. This will be incorporated in a larger sequence. So we have here the whole readout train. We combine it into a encoding object, which also holds a phase correction acquisition and also a frequency correction scan. And this then will be incorporated into a whole EPI sequence where our EPI kernel would be the excitation, so the slice selection, together with the encoding that we just saw, and then in the end we'll have a spoiling event, and combined with a fast saturation right at the start. So if we go into the framework, this is our current development version of this. We can exactly see the same what we saw before. And to give you some small tour, what we can do is to, of course, see the sequence plot. We have the ability to add different information to this plot, like the gradient moment and different on different axes, and many more. We can, as the sequences are all configurable with different protocol parameters, we can open the same protocol window that we would use at the MR system, and for example change, let's say, the number of measurements, and it would change to 2 measurements with a quite long TR. So we would maybe make this a bit shorter. So now we have 2 repetitions of this EPI sequence. We can also import PulseSec sequences into gammaSTAR modules. So if we, let's see, if you go to our hierarchical view, this is also an EPI sequence, but we have here a gammaSTAR element which takes a PulseSec string and translates it to gammaSTAR. But the nice thing is that you can also then combine it with gammaSTAR modules. So you could have a slice selection written in PulseSec and put it in here, and then combine it, for example, let's say with a simple spoiler gradient. So you can look for different modules, just drag and drop them into your sequence. So let's put it right next to the kernel here. Give it a name, and it will appear in our hierarchy. But also, if you look at our sequence structure, it will also appear as a second spoiler gradient right after the PulseSec EPI sequence. So we can, just by dragging sequence elements and dropping them into this hierarchy, add sequence modules, but we can also just delete them or move them or do whatever we like with them. We have a second view here, which I would show you for the flash sequence. So we again start with an overview of our sequence. Now this is a simple flash sequence, so we have a kernel that also shows us the slice selection and the single line readout element, and this is then looped over slices, lines, averages, repetitions, so that in the end it would give us the whole sequence readout here. So we can use we can take our sequence, export the sequence, for example, as gammaSTAR file. So this would give us all the flexibility at the scanner, make the sequence configurable being able to change protocol values, but we can also export it as a static PySec file or as a static gammaSTAR file. So that would actually give us the static hardware executions instead of having this flexibility available at the scanner. So I said that the sequence is implemented in Lua. So each of these modules which are combined here can be changed by just double-clicking it. And then we will get a subplot of exactly what this module is doing. And all the related parameters are combined with Lua scripts that are then executed during runtime. So any parameter that we use to, in the end, calculate the different gradient shapes and the F shapes are based on Lua scripts. And if we, or when we execute this sequence, we basically take this hierarchical view and traverse the sequence from top to bottom, collect all these, as we called it, atomic events, calculate the start time and the shape of the gradients and the IF shapes, and then put it into a sequence diagram where we also execute the different loops after each other. So speaking about executing the sequence, now we have a flash sequence. We also implemented a wrapper for the MR0 simulation environment. So we can take our MR sequence, in this case, a flash sequence, simulate it, and in the same way, we could also then send it to different tabletop systems or other simulation environments. So it took some time, but now we see the result of exactly the sequence, meaning that also the trajectory coming from the simulation coming from MR0, the reconstruction from a gammaSTAR reconstruction that I will also present in a minute. So if we, let's see, if we change the protocol, for example, larger TE, larger TR, should then also give a new contrast to this image, as you can see. We also can do that for non-Cartesian sequences where we apply a non-uniform Fourier transform, for example, the spiral sequence. We can just send it to the simulation, wait for some seconds, and see the reconstructed spiral image, which is exactly the interpreted sequence that we can see here. Also, again, with the k-space trajectory, thanks to the MR0 environment. So, talking about executing the MR sequences, that's also what we do on tabletop systems. So we use them for education, but also for our PhD students to try their sequence developments, because we have some of these systems, but we only have one large MR system. So we can be a bit more efficient. Our students or colleagues can first execute sequences on the tabletop systems and check what the sequence is doing there. So we implemented driver software both for the Opera system and the Illuma system by Resonant. We connected it directly to the gammaSTAR UI and used a open source server called Marcos to execute our gammaSTAR sequence and send it to the Ochre system. It will be sent back, automatically reconstructed, and then also will output or will be shown in the gammaSTAR frontend. Just some example images from with a spin echo, gradient echo, and an API sequence. So the API sequence was actually only one single acquisition, but I think it's quite nice to really see also these more complex sequences like API to be executed on tabletop systems. So that brings me to the reconstruction part. So whenever we talk about vendor-independent imaging, we should not only see the acquisition side, but also the reconstruction side. So if we would have the exact same sequence running on two different MR systems, we would still get very different images because of different reconstruction routines. Also, if we are executing MR sequences on, for example, tabletop systems or in simulation environments, we just get a bunch of raw data, like number arrays, for example. So we thought that we would need a routine that would allow also vendor-agnostic reconstruction, so that the same reconstruction can be used for these simulation environments, tabletop systems, but also for the different MR systems. So it's based on ISMM raw data format, and this format gives us the possibility to include the header information, so the general acquisition information like matrix size, field of view, and we can take that all from the gammaSTAR framework. It has for each single acquisition the data header, flagging it if it's a imaging scan, a calibration scan, phase correction scan, and also gives the indices to really sort it into the case-based objects. And then it has the acquisition, the complex acquisition data. So if we look at such a gammaSTAR sequence and just select a single ADC event, it already comes with all the encoding information that is required to fill in ISMM RD object. So the translation or the execution of the sequence during runtime also builds up such an ADC header. The keys are all compatible with ISMM RD, so there can be a direct translation from gammaSTAR acquisitions to ISMM RD. And based on this ISMM RD data on the flags being used, our colleague Jörn Huber developed a framework which would then automatically select different modules to be executed in the reconstruction pipeline. For example, if there was parallel imaging, it would apply some kind of reconstruction, for example, Guapa, or in 3D Caipirinha. It would do different types of coil sensitivity and coil combination. It will detect if it's Cartesian or non-Cartesian imaging, and then adapt the reconstruction based on that to perform a non-uniform Fourier transform instead of a Fourier transform. And it would be able to do all the R2 spin labeling, post-processing, for example, but also some quality assessment on the images. So that the goal is to really send the data from each of the systems to this reconstruction framework as ISMM RD data, then automatically select the different modules, reconstruction routines that need to be executed to get the correct image in the end, which is then sent back to the gammaSTAR framework. So just some examples, because I'm running out of time. The comparison between gammaSTAR and our Siemens ICE construction here at the scanner, and also some application of parallel imaging, but also ASA post-processing. And that's all done without any user input. So it really automatically detects all these different modules to be executed after each other. Then maybe very quickly going into the topic of AI. So we had a project 2 years ago where we aimed for AI-driven and automatic MR sequence optimization in gammaSTAR. And that means that you would tell the AI what the sequence should look, or the image should look like in the end, and then the AI would automatically put the correct sequence parameters for you. So we had the first AI-generated MR sequences in gammaSTAR from their project. And now we extended it, and my colleague Snara did a great job in including a prototype of a co-pilot for MR sequence development into the framework. So you could ask for specific things to do, or you could ask to get specific information about the sequences and so on. So the vision is basically to enable robust cross-vendor imaging by using the same underlying MR sequence implementation, but also reconstruction techniques, making innovation transfer faster and easier as it is currently, and to make sequence development more accessible to non-experts with easy to learn sequence development processes. And with that, I want to thank my co-workers, my colleagues, and all the contributors and collaboration partners.
Thank you, Daniel, for this wonderful presentation. I think now it's time for the discussion, and the audience may ask questions now, either post them in the chat or just speak up.
Yeah, sorry, I went like 5 minutes over time, so.
I think it's okay. All right, maybe in the meanwhile, I have a question. What are the next milestones for gammaSTAR?
But since we have native driver implementations for Philips and Siemens now, we really aim for having the same for GE. I mean, we have this, let's say, workaround which would restrict us to exporting like static sequences. So it's not really the same as having a native driver implementation, because we cannot actually change anything at scanner. So one big part of gammaSTAR is having MR sequences as you're used to. So changing the parameters on the fly, enabling, disabling parallel imaging, so that the sequence logic would automatically adapt. And that would not be possible. So that's what we really want to also achieve for GE systems, that, to support all these three major vendors.
It's quite interesting, and maybe where do you see gammaSTAR in the landscape of sequence development frameworks? So how does it compare, for example, to PulseSec or IDEA?
I think so. Let's compare to IDEA. I think it's very, and that also goes for PulseSec. It's very nice to have a scripting language. So to not need to compile your sequence, to have a scripting language, to have direct feedback during the implementation of the sequence, and also no compilation steps required to bring the sequence to the scanner. Also, I think that scripting languages are quite easier to learn than, for example, C++. And so adding this graphical user interface would make it way more accessible also for non-experts. So also people that are not used to program could use existing modules and just combine them into new sequences, play around on that level. Or if you want to dig deeper, then you could also change these modules by changing the Lua code behind that, or could generate new modules. So you have the flexibility to implement these sequences on different levels. And I think the main, or to compare it to PySec, I think that it's very complementary. I don't think it's really the one or the other, because I think PySec has a great place in rapid prototyping. So you can just use PyPySec, for example, write down your sequence in Python, and then you have your sequence. You can go to the scanner and execute it. But if you want to have something more flexible, configurable, where you want to play around with the different parameters at the scanner without going back to exporting the sequence and changing the implementation, that's, I think, where gammaSTAR is quite strong. And also all the real-time features,
Yeah.
feedback, prospective motion correction, dynamic timing extensions. That's something that's enabled because of this flexible structure, and because we have the logic of the sequence available during runtime, so that it can also change according to different feedback mechanisms.
All right. I think we have a question in the chat. Derek Meyer asks, is X nuclei imaging supported?
Yes. So I would actually need to ask my colleague Simon, but he implemented exactly an X nuclei sequence. So we did that, but if you want to have more information, I could also come back to that, and the best contact would be my colleague that implemented exactly this sequence, but it's definitely possible, yes.
Yeah. We have another questions. Any advances regarding Bruca scanner?
Yes and no. So yeah, we started doing that, and we really would like to also have a native driver doing all these calculations on the sequence logic during runtime. But that seems to be quite complicated. So we are trying to do that. But we started actually to have more of a translation to this VUCA PPG format. So that's also what I think is available for PySec. So that would be again to a static format. So this PPG format would be a static text-based format that we could translate to. But we would really like to, the same with the GE question, we would really like to have native drivers for the different sequences. Because also with these formats, we see many issues from time to time. So that we, for example, are limited in specific timings of the sequence. And yeah. So it was not that easy, and it's also nothing that's published or released now.
I'm just curious. There were a lot of reconstruction algorithms that are so general for 2D and 3D sequences. There are some reconstruction that's specific for ASL, and this is just one application in MR. Do you expect also the community in the future to contribute towards this framework and develop their own reconstruction algorithms that can be added to gammaSTAR?
Yes, definitely. So as we are currently in a project where we really work on the redesign, and we aim for having also the sequence development part, the new one. So we have a publicly available version, which is back from the originating from the first prototype. So we really want to release this new version this in a month. So we aim for after IceMem. And for the reconstruction part, we also definitely want to do that, but that's very early in development. So we are currently still working on the different interfaces to make this robust. But then it should be such a modular platform that you can just contribute in adding different post-processing algorithms. So that's also how this project started here, because we have a lot of different Python scripts, FSA configurations, and so on for post-processing lying around. And then 2 years later, we want to reuse it, and then it's difficult because it's not integrated in some kind of framework. Also for the whole war database reconstruction, we have for all the different trajectories, we have code snippets that were never combined into some kind of framework. So at first, it was more like getting all our code into one framework. So it could be reused and based on the same image input with IceMem RD. But we think it's also it would be also useful to have contributions of the community there, definitely.
Great. I am personally, to be honest, looking forward to starting to implement sequences using gammaSTAR. All right. I think this brings us to the end of the seminar. Daniel, thank you again for the presentation. Thank you for answering all the other questions. It was a pleasure having you here. And thanks to the audience for being with us in this fine evening. And we look forward to seeing you in the next KIS seminar.
Thanks a lot for inviting me.